Boston Tea Party was one of the most important events leading to the American Revolution. It took place on December 16th, 1773, in Boston, Massachusetts, when American colonists protested against British taxation by destroying an entire shipment of tea. The event was not just about tea, it was about control, representation, and the growing conflict between the colonies and the British Empire. The roots of the Boston Tea Party began after the French and Indian War, which ended in 1763. The war had been costly, and Great Britain was left with a large debt. To raise money, the British Parliament decided that the American colonies should help pay for their own defense and the cost of the empire. Over the next decade, several taxes were introduced. The Sugar Act of 1764 placed duties on imported sugar and molasses. The Stamp Act of 1765 required colonists to buy special stamps for paper goods, newspapers, and legal documents. The colonists opposed these taxes, arguing that they had no representatives in Parliament to speak for them. They believed it was unfair to be taxed by a government in which they had no voice. Their protests gave rise to the phrase, "No taxation without representation." Due to resistance and boycotts, Parliament repealed the Stamp Act, but it continued to assert its right to tax the colonies. In 1767, the Townshend Acts placed new taxes on imported goods such as glass, paper, paint, and tea. Most of these taxes were later removed, but the tax on tea was left in place as a symbol of Parliament's authority. By 1773, the British East India Company, one of the most powerful trading companies in the world, was in financial trouble. Millions of pounds of unsold tea were sitting in British warehouses. To help the company, Parliament passed the Tea Act. This law allowed the East India Company to sell tea directly to the American colonies without using colonial merchants. This made British tea cheaper, even with the tax included. To British officials, the Tea Act seemed reasonable. To the colonists, it was another attempt to force them to accept Parliament's right to tax them. Many saw it as a trick to make them buy taxed tea. Across the colonies, protests spread. In several ports, including New York and Philadelphia, ships carrying British tea were turned away before they could unload. In Boston, tensions were especially high. The city had already experienced violence in 1770, when British soldiers killed 5 colonists in the Boston Massacre. When 3 ships carrying East India Company tea, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, arrived in Boston Harbor in late 1773, the situation quickly escalated. Colonial law required that the ships unload their cargo and pay the duties within 20 days. If they did not, customs officials could seize the tea. The royal governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, refused to allow the ships to leave without paying the tax. The deadline for unloading was December 16th. As the deadline approached, thousands of colonists gathered at the Old South Meeting House to demand that the tea be sent back to Britain. Governor Hutchinson refused to compromise. That evening, after the final meeting broke up, a group of colonists decided to take matters into their own hands. Around 100 men, many of them members of the Sons of Liberty, disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians to conceal their identities. They marched to Griffin's Wharf, where the 3 ships were anchored. A crowd of supporters watched as the men climbed aboard. Using hatchets and clubs, they broke open the wooden chests of tea and dumped the contents into the harbor. They worked efficiently, and avoided unnecessary damage. No one was harmed, and the men even swept the decks clean when they were done. By the end of the night, 342 chests of tea, about 90,000 pounds, had been thrown into Boston Harbor. The value of the destroyed tea would equal over $1 million today. The water of the harbor was stained brown with tea leaves. Despite the size of the protest, there was no violence or looting. It was a peaceful but deliberate act of defiance against British rule. When news of the Boston Tea Party reached Britain, the government was outraged. Parliament saw it as a direct attack on British authority and property. In response, it passed a series of harsh new laws in 1774, known as the Coercive Acts, which the colonists called the Intolerable Acts. These laws closed the port of Boston until the tea was paid for, limited town meetings, placed Massachusetts under stricter royal control, and allowed British soldiers to be housed in colonial homes. Instead of isolating Boston, the Intolerable Acts united the colonies. Many saw the punishment of Massachusetts as a threat to all of their liberties. Colonies sent supplies and messages of support to Boston. In September 1774, representatives from 12 colonies met in Philadelphia at the First Continental Congress to organize a coordinated response.